The world feels a bit toxic and blah these days, doesn't it? The same old people coming up with the same old solutions for big problems that still don't work. We need to change the game. Well, welcome to Women Advancing. Join me, host Kate Byrne, in this dynamic bi-weekly podcast, bringing together female founders, funders, and thought leaders. Listen to the people driving change, how they got there, how you can help, and yep, how you might just be the next one to advance. Proof that all ships rise with women at the helm. That's what happens when Women Advance with Kate Byrne. So what is the role of media today? What happened to the lost art of critical thinking? With more women taking on leadership and senior editorial helms of key global brands such as New York Times, the Harvard Business Review, Forbes, Inc., Fast Company, how will the way we see the world and its stories shift? These are some of the questions I delve into with Amy Bernstein, editor of the Harvard Business Review. We take a look at talk about leading teams and navigating the needs of that multi-generational team. Many a takeaway here, with one standing out with regards to owning your mic. Listen and see if you know what it is. Better yet, do you practice it? Amy Bernstein, editor of the Harvard Business Review, and so many other extraordinary talents. Welcome, welcome to Women Advancing.
Thank you, Kate Byrne.
Thank you, madam. It is so, I love this, everyone, because Amy and I have known each other, I'm not going to say how long, but let's just say
25 years.
Yeah,
25 years.
Amy said it. So we have, and we've lived a lot. We've lived a lot of media and we've lived a lot of life, right?
A lot of life.
A whole lot of life and breakthroughs. Started off in San Francisco and now we're both out here on the East Coast. Amy, obviously up in Massachusetts, me down here in Charlottesville, Virginia. Who would have thunk?
Who would have guessed that, huh?
And trust me, Queen of the Random. I own that. I am that. I am. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit. Because I don't know the whole origin story. So share a little bit about like how you got to where you are and just some of the little steps along the way. Because, so often, so many people think that career, as people are getting ready to graduate or going to college or whatever, everyone always feels like, oh my God, I've got to make this decision right. Because if I don't, it's all over. And blah, blah, blah. So not true. So life is one big zigzag.
It is. And there are very few irrevocable decisions when you're talking about career. Haven't you found that?
Oh, if anyone has found that, it's me. I am the cat of 20 lives. Forget 9. I forgot. I finished those long ago.
So I certainly never set out to be here where I am, editing Harvard Business Review. I've been a journalist since I graduated from college. That was random as well. I wanted to teach Latin and Greek, but, my mom convinced me to just try working for a year before going to graduate school. And she was right to do that, and it took. I really loved working at CBS News and being in the middle of the news gathering. I found that incredibly exciting. And that was a few decades ago. And I sort of hopped around. I got into magazines when I was about 28, working for US News and World Report, and then started working at a startup magazine called Girls Content, which had a brief but spectacular life in the late 90s, founded by Steve Brill of Court TV and American Lawyer fame. And it really looked at the business of media, news, the business of media. And I loved doing that. I loved the startup world and I loved business. I was a babe in the woods in business reporting, but learned a lot. You can't help learning a lot if you work for Steve Brill. It was journalistic boot camp. Then my partner got a job out in San Francisco. All this was on the East Coast. She was the creative director for the San Francisco Examiner and then the Chronicle. So I had to find a job out in San Francisco, and that's where I met you in 1999. Again, the industry standard, talk about your brief but spectacular lives,
Absolutely.
right?
Yes.
we rode the highest highs and we crashed. 2001, what an adventure. Then the thing is, and I'm just going to pull the camera back a little bit.
Yeah.
All of this was a learning experience.
Yeah.
And, I learned in the course of this that it's how you tell your story. It's not a cynical how you tell your story. It's how you take all these experiences and make them
Right.
add up to something. So in the middle of the crash of 2001, I started working for Business 2.0, which was Time Inc.'s answer to the industry standard and Red Herring and all those internet economy magazines. And from there, I hopped over to a thought leadership quarterly published by Booz Allen. It was called Strategy in Business. I'd never heard of the term thought leadership, and I'm still sort of running away from it. But that got me into the world of management theory, which was really interesting. I mean, there's a lot of nonsense, but there's a lot of really brilliant thinking there. Yeah, I mean, I find it's very, very good. I then actually went to work in industry. I went to work for Manpower and learned a lot about business and a lot about how business leaders use ideas. It was a company that thought a lot about why it did what it does,
Yeah.
why it does what it does. And it tries to take a long-term view, which is admirable. And then, I was offered the chance to interview for the job of editing HBR, and I took it, and here I am. Here I've been for 13 years. And it
Yeah.
has been an incredibly enriching run, not necessarily financially, but it's been exciting and fun and interesting. And every week I feel like I've learned, I'm a little bit smarter than I was when I started the week. So, at the
Uh,
end of every week, I feel a little smarter. So, yeah.
which is amazing. And I had forgotten some of those other commonalities with the Business 2.0 piece. And also I was there for a New York minute. Seriously. When we had the dive that was the standard, I'd gone
Yeah.
over to eCompany now Business 2.0, and I stayed there briefly, but that's when I made my jump to Fast Company.
Right. Right. You worked at Fast Company. But, in the pool of, of sort of internet economy magazine
Yes,
talent, it was inevitable we would run into each other a
absolutely.
thousand times,
Yeah,
especially out in San Francisco.
especially then. And it was interesting too, seeing how, I found it hard going from the upstart woof, entrepreneurial whoosh that was the standard. And even though it was part of IDG, it didn't feel like it. We hung the pirate's flag, as we always said, right? Good thing, bad thing, not so sure, but we did it anyway. And
Yeah, they were
then,
over in Boston. We were in San Francisco.
right, exactly. The kids were out playing. And
Yeah,
then what happened too, though, was with Business 2.0, it was interesting going into Time Inc., who was a little late in the game.
yeah.
I just remember their first cover of E Company Now, and it was a pool.
It wasn't just a pool; it was a kiddie pool.
It was a kiddie pool. And guess what? Yes. And it was literally the next week we announced it was already done. It was over. So I just remember it was symptomatic of what ended up happening in the long run. But it was a fascinating time to be a part of that. It was so much fun being a part of history.
It was really heady, didn't I mean
I
I never
did.
knew it was true. And also that the kind of success we were having when we were successful. I mean, I remember just saying to myself, I cannot take this for granted, you know?
No, I knew I was on to something when I had left Business Week to go to the industry standard. Don't know that that was necessary, and I still think of Business Week as dear family. However, I
You
remember
mean
being very flattered because we had so many ads. We broke history, and no one has ever come near how many ads we had in the issues of the Publishing Industry Bureau. But what happened was I closed the issues down because they were getting so thick, and it was such a bad reader experience. And we were ticking off advertisers. And I said, okay, we're
thinking
going to,
about how to create more edit pages because there's a minimum percentage
right.
of pages that have to be edit
Had
for
to
this
edit
not to be a
ratio.
catalog and get charged a different rate.
There was a lot. We learned a lot actually about the business itself. But then, so we capped it. And then it was brilliant because we were able to push everybody into future issues. And then Business Week started following suit. So I thought, we're onto something here. And then, of course, it all sort of shifted and went away. But question for you, were there certain skills that you would say that you relied on then, early days? And are they any different than ones you kind of lean on now? Or is it all
Well,
kind of the same and just an older version?
it's funny. I think a lot of the skills that have helped me for the last 20 years, 25 years were skills that I had to develop back when you and I were at the Standard. I bet you found the same thing.
Very much so.
So keeping your head about you, keeping your wits about you, it's not necessarily, we talk a lot about skills. So of course the meaning of it is kind of getting a little fuzzy, but I think being able to maintain your sense of humor when the highs seem very high and the lows seem very low, to get a grip, not to take yourself too seriously, because I don't know if you recall, Kate, but there are a lot of people out there in the heady days of 2000 or so that who took themselves pretty seriously.
Very seriously. And
Yeah.
I still, well, and there were some that just sort of looked the other way and then ended up getting arrested. But then there were some, at the end of the day, business is still business and you can weave a good tale, but it still has to make a profit. So for me, early days, that was really important just because there were so many people, especially in our industry, you hear it's all storytelling. And that's the
It's
other
all
thing.
storytelling, but it's something else. It's knowing the fundamental physics of business, right?
Yes.
It's knowing that you can't keep touting, you can't keep touting that you're pre-profit and you're going to join forces with another pre-profit company, and suddenly that's going to solve that problem. Negative gross margins are not a good thing.
No, exactly. And I think I just finally started asking everyone, what's your business model? Because
Yeah.
as you know,
What's your business model? Yeah, exactly.
how are you making money? And they said, well, we're working on that. But all we know is that, our investor said that we had to run in your magazine.
It
Yeah,
was really uncool to ask that question. It was
very
like,
much so.
it was, you know what? Hey, you just don't get it, do you? It's not always about making money, right?
You can make money and change the world. You can, and you can have purpose. Those are two things. Money's a good thing, but you have to be smart with it. And that's, that's something that I see a lot now is you either have the people that hate money's bad, it's evil, and there's so many, that's a whole other rabbit hole that we won't go down,
Yeah.
but there is a lot of that, or it's purpose driven. I want to save the world, etc. Well, guess what? It can be both and ideally it would be both and. I have a challenge, and I take challenge with a lot of nonprofits
Yeah.
because just because you're nonprofit doesn't mean you should not be running that nonprofit with a good business sensibility. Because otherwise
Right.
you may be helping, but you're in the long run draining. And
Right.
and so often people are starting their own thing when I swear, if you looked around, there might be something like it already existing, and maybe go and add your efforts and your skills and everything to it. And if it needs to
Right.
change, then go ahead, do it there. Like, what are some of the shifts that you're seeing in media on your end now? I mean, especially now, I'm actually thinking because you've been at HBR. Well, they had a digital presence, but they've obviously built it up. The magazine is beautiful. I just read the issue that talked a lot about, had interesting stuff about AI, but also talked about team building and things. That was such a good issue. I mean, I kept thinking, all right, I'll read a few. And honestly, I read almost every single article and it felt so good. It's been a while since I've held a magazine. I won't lie.
Yeah. Well, we really lean into what makes the magazine a great experience, but we're lucky. We're
Yeah.
lucky that magazines have had a hard road to hoe, as you know. The balance of our efforts are shifting digital. They have been for years. It's the
Yeah.
right thing to do. It's how people get their information. And I think that I think that just sort of broadly, it's important for us to remember that we're not, that the pool of competition, the field of competition, our competitors are not just other media outlets. It's any way that people spend their time.
Really
And
good.
that also affects their expectations. So in e-commerce, Amazon sets the high water mark, right? And
Mhm.
we all have to get up there with the consumer experience. In media, it's YouTube, it's Netflix, it's whatever people are listening to on Spotify. No one is saying, oh, HBO doesn't have to deliver a podcast experience that's that great. I mean, no, they're all saying no. If I'm going to be listening to this, it has to be at least as engaging as what I could be listening to on Spotify, right?
Right. No, you're right. And it also speaks to the way that you have to meet your consumer, right? The reader, the audience where they're at. And that could
Right.
be audio, it could be visual, it could be reading, it could be experiential.
It's not either or, it's and. And so
Yeah.
one thing we say to ourselves that I think is really important, and we have to remind ourselves, is that the unit of analysis cannot be the article. For us, it has to be the idea. And we have to find ways to make that idea compelling and urgent and relevant to our subscribers who are our customers in a variety of ways, in ways that are as useful as possible to them in the moment. And that's why we cannot say this is a magazine article. Of course it's a podcast. Of course it's a 5 minute video thing. We have experimented with all the platforms.
Right. And then you're just determining, okay, which aspect of the story is best told, best shared, best teased up based on the type of content outlet, right?
And additionally, it's always what would our subscriber need? The
Got it.
best aspect of the story for the medium is very much shaped by the needs of our subscribers.
And you've heard people saying, oh my gosh, media is jumping all over it. They're either telling too much of the story, they're telling the wrong parts of the story, etc. What do you see as the
Or they're
role?
telling parts of the story that don't comport with my version
My
of the
views,
story.
exactly.
Right.
So, what should, I hate using that word, but what do you think the role of media really can play moving forward? Is
Well,
it
I
different
mean,
than what it is right now?
so let's separate out journalism as a subgroup of media.
Really good point. Yes,
And
fair.
I think, the job of journalism is not changed. It's to surface the truth. It's to tell stories that need to be told. It's to, it's to, it's to hold the powerful to account. That's never changed. It's not to push an agenda. In fact, it is not to push an agenda. Equally, it's not to, I mean, I believe this strongly. There are rarely two equal sides. First of all, there are rarely two sides. And no
Exactly.
matter how many sides, they're rarely equal in terms of their veracity, their consequence. I mean, your mission really has to be something about delivering the truth, right?
Right. Whether
About
people want to
ferreting
hear it
it
or
out
not.
and delivering it.
So, and what about, critical thinking? I mean, that's the other thing.
Well,
What's the responsibility? You know what I mean? People are looking at things, reading things, and you have to stop for a second, take a step back and go, are you kidding me? How could you even think that was true?
right. I mean, did you and I talk about this when we chatted last week?
I don't know.
Because it's something I think about all the time. I think we've seen such a diminution of critical thinking in a moment when we need it most, because we are so easily manipulated.
Yeah.
And just because you saw it on TV doesn't make it true. And just because you saw it on the internet doesn't make it true. And honestly, if you cannot, it's that power that we have. It's a human superpower that says, you know what? This text on my phone telling me that there is a package waiting for me, and if I just give them my social security number, they'll get this package to me. That's critical thinking that says, oh, better not hit that link. Where is the skepticism? Where is the part where you're supposed to show your figuring before you give an answer? Like, I know what you're saying, but how'd you get there? And
You know,
it's not just on the part of of consumers. I see it with journalists as well. You can't accept what everyone says on face value, or you shouldn't.
well, yeah, gone are the follow-up questions. I mean, there should
I
be.
mean, gone are the follow-up questions. Why was that a good thing? A serious lack of courage, frankly. And I see it all over. And you know what? Some of us are going to get canceled, and maybe we'll get canceled by people we don't really need to be in contact with anyway. I mean, the lack of comedy is really, really upsetting. And
Yeah,
the idea that we can agree to disagree agreeably, or whatever that line is. I mean,
right.
there's a lot of virtue in that.
No,
We should be hearing both sides.
I completely agree. And then that's where critical thinking, that's also where discernment comes in,
Yeah.
and freedom of, thought to a degree. But I just think just because somebody doesn't agree with you doesn't mean that, well,
Well,
doesn't
you
always
know
mean
what?
that they're
The
awful and
whole
horrible.
idea that the whole world is a good versus evil struggle, and that there's you're either X or Y. Well, you know what? There are a lot of things in between. When something seems so easy and so clean, chances are it's probably a little reductive. You know what I mean?
I would totally agree. Something that usually means, okay, great, someone was really good at sticking to their talking points. And that's the whole story. And omission can be a form of betrayal, is too strong a word, but definitely there's a reason. That's one thing I have learned is often what is left unsaid can be even more important.
But that's also where critical thinking comes in. Is you should be listening for. I mean, you should always be asking: does this story add up?
Yeah. Does this ring true? Where does this land? But okay. So with all that, what are you most excited about when you're looking out there and look at different topics? Like one thing that just when you were even talking about the whole notion of critical thinking and all of just human mind, there's so many people that are worried that AI is going to take over and be horrible and all of that. Well, this, by the way, is one way if you stay in the game and critically think the humanity, that's unique. That's something AI
Mm-hmm.
can't do. So
Mm-hmm.
apply that superpower that we have. I think so many people sort of roll on their back and go, oh my gosh, I'm going to be taken over by the machine.
I just feel like we forget that we are the shapers of our own lives,
Mhm.
and you don't give up your personal sovereignty like that. I mean, every puff of wind shouldn't knock you over.
Right.
And by the way, sometimes they're salutary. And so I don't know. I completely agree with you on this. And I the opportunity, the whole co-pilot idea, Microsoft sort of owns that word, but it's actually a really good metaphor for how my colleagues are using AI. I haven't really been using it that much, but a lot of people I work with have been using it, and it's been great. I mean, it's limited. You have to understand the limitations, but you
Right.
better understand it, first of all. I also think,
Yep.
I mean, listen, I think it's like any tool. It can be used for harm or it can be used for good.
Yes, exactly. Pick your
You
technology.
know, well, but so Yuval Noah Harari said this, so I'm going to steal the idea. But the printing press was a net gain for humanity, but some really weird stuff has come off the printing press. Some proto QAnon stuff
Yep.
where witches and so forth. A lot of conspiracy theories were being distributed thanks to the printing press and got a broader audience and a lot
Right.
more followers. So, and I mean, hundreds of years ago.
Right. Right.
So I think we just, again, these simplistic Manichaean ways of dividing, of envisioning our future just seem, well, they seem reductive to me. And as if they're missing hidden threats and equally hidden opportunities.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me is there are some power player females running media entities or the platform or the holding the megaphone.
Mm-hmm.
think of you, I think of New York Times, I think of Jenna's over at Forbes, I think of Stephanie Meadow, Fast Company Inc. I think so. It's just interesting to me. Do you think that the person who's holding that megaphone, will that shift at all? Um, Sort of the lens through which certain subjects are looked at, or stories are delivered, or
So
conversations that are
I
had?
think so. I think broadly speaking, because I think people from different backgrounds are shaped by different dynamics.
Right.
And that is just true. And
Yep.
so the experience of being a white woman in 2024 with my background or your background is just different from the background and the dynamics that shaped someone who did not grow up with the kind of privilege that I did, or the kind of
Right.
privilege that you did.
No,
And I think that
absolutely true.
absolutely shapes the way, that shapes the frame through which you see the world and understand how it works. And it's why it is so incredibly important for us to to talk and to share those views and to understand why we think the way we do. Just because I think differently from that person over there doesn't make her wrong or me right. It's just different.
Exactly. Well, that goes back to that whole gray thing. And, there's so much value to that difference, I believe, right? It enriches everything. I mean, from a business, it's how you make better products that match more people.
You make
And
much better decisions that way. You make better products, your teams function better, but it takes a lot of skill to weave in the different perspectives and to understand, to make sure that you're hearing from everyone you need to hear from as a leader. I mean,
true.
or so I've heard from APR. But yeah.
I also think it takes tremendous self-awareness and self-accountability and humility.
And humility.
Hey, I have my own bias, whether I like to think I don't. We all do, because of the point you brought up earlier. And I can't tell you how many times I catch myself, or just there's certain assumptions that are made. And every time I think, and I'm surrounded a lot, it's part of my life being sort of seeped in all of this, and it's still there. And I always think, okay, great. Well, that's part of that humility.
Found as you've gotten older that you've learned to shut up more.
Oh my, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
That's where sharing the mic comes in. That's where going in and what I've really caught and realized that I did historically, and I probably still do sometimes, when in a group of people and there's a conversation and people are talking, blah, 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 and then, they're coming down and there's like, anybody else have something to say? Fighting the urge to say, oh yeah, I do. Because
Yeah.
I always have to say, of course you do. And is it really going to add value? But is it more adding value to you and your ego saying, yeah, I've got stuff. I'm contributing, or is it just stop? And more often than not,
Yeah.
now to your point, it's like, you shouldn't have.
I learned this thing. It's an editing principle I learned from one of the most wonderful editors I ever worked for, named Mike Ruby. And it is such an important principle. Before you make a change when you're editing, ask yourself, are you making it better, or are you making it different? And that applies to me in so many different contexts beyond editing. Like, if you're going to open your mouth and take up time in a meeting, you better ask yourself whether that question you just asked am I adding to the conversation? Am I moving us in a different direction? Or I'm just making sure my voice is heard. Now, I also want to pause and say, for people in senior positions, we have the luxury of asking that question. I think that a lot of times, particularly for young women, just being heard is a challenge. And
Yes.
I have to think through what that means for them.
Yeah. And I think, having spoken to founders actually, and others, but that whole notion of speaking up and being shot down, and how that the role that plays in helping them become more resilient, and then knowing when to jump in, and when to not, and
Yeah.
and when to speak truth to power. I mean, that was always a little tricky part I had, um, was I didn't
Yeah,
like
but
it.
that to me was one of the things that when I have heard you speak truth to power a few times, and every time you did, I thought, she's
No,
so
thank you. But there's a way to do it. There is a way to do it. And I've gotten better. I'm more finessed now at it.
no, you're being very humble. I saw you doing it, a quarter century ago, Kate, and you
Thank
always
you.
had the honesty and the diplomacy to carry it off.
Well, thank you, thank you, thank you. So speaking of diplomacy, lady, how about managing all those different generations?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this is where I really have to check myself because there are
Hmm.
times when I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure sleep pod is what the organization owes you.
Again.
Um, and explaining that, I mean, that line from Mad Men when Peggy is the young copywriter is complaining to Don Draper, her boss, that, she's not getting credit for something that she did, and how come she doesn't get the credit? And he leans over and he shins. That's what the money's for. Sometimes I feel like saying that.
Yes. No, I know. And what I just really want everyone to remember, because I have done this myself, but this whole notion of, okay, folks have been in a job 6 months, maybe a year. Okay, it's time for a
Yes,
promotion and a title.
and rate. Yes. And
And
if I'm not getting it today, can I please have a timeline? And the answer is always going to be absolutely not. Absolutely not. I'm not making promises I can't keep.
right. And the truth
Right.
of the matter is, everybody, is that it, as much as we want to say it's all organizations are flattening, whatever, there is still a learning curve. And there are still things you need to get under, one needs to learn and get under their belt. Because when you're put in a different, larger position, you're going to face stuff that you haven't, and you're not going to know what the heck to do. Especially what you're not expecting is when all of a sudden you shift from a peer to your peer's boss. And
Yeah.
there's a whole lot of mental acrobatics and relational situations that are not always comfortable. And
Well, those are the skills that really do carry you through. The technical skills are actually very easy. I
yes,
mean,
exactly.
your kids are learning new computer languages
Right.
online,
They're
just
natives.
doing it.
Yes.
Right. But the hard stuff, the really hard stuff, are the relational skills that used to be called soft skills, but for some reason we're not allowed to use that term anymore.
Use that
But the
anymore.
ability to navigate difficult conversations, the ability to read a room, the ability to communicate what needs to be heard in a way that makes it hearable
Curable
to
and
the right
power.
people.
Yeah.
Those skills you need those skills at every step of your career. And those skills, most of us aren't born with them.
No.
Most of us aren't. And that takes a lot of seasoning. So, yeah,
No,
I would
totally
say get a
agree.
grip.
Yeah, and it's learning the whole notion of responding versus reacting.
And the other part is just understanding the relationship between employee and employer, which is that the organization owes a lot to its employees and it needs to be able to hold on to them. And it needs to do that by developing them and giving to them the kinds of recognition, rewards, feedback, whatever form it takes, that keeps them moving and feeling engaged. But the organization is not your parent and it's not your family. And something that I think we were a little guilty of way back in the day is it's not a good substitute for your community, your real community. And work is a real community, but it's not family, it's not friends, it's not church, it's not your neighborhood. It's not the things that you kind of have to pay attention to and that will give back to you 1,000 times over, you know?
Absolutely. That's, I think, a surefire way to get in. It's one of those things where you'll feel better too, because it all changes. And as long as you're grounded and you're aligned, I think there's no substitute to that. And everyone I know is really anxious. That's one way to de-anxiousize yourself.
Well, I was going to say that remember we started this conversation with, being able to just sort of it's a form of humility. Finding Figuring out where you stand in a situation and not getting high on your own supply, not, knowing that the highs are never as high as they really, as they feel they are. And the lows are never as low as you think they are when you're in the middle of panicking about something. It's just being able to keep yourself steady. Self-regulation. It's a part of emotional intelligence.
No, it's absolutely true. And I think that's one of the things that when you make that transition early days into a career or into a new workplace, leaving a familiar workplace and going to the next one, just remember there is that little transition phase and it feels funny. It's supposed to, it's new. And that, some people will say, is it imposter syndrome? I think really what imposter syndrome is, you feel weird because you're in a new spot and you're not familiar. It doesn't mean you're not supposed to be there. It just means it's new. So be patient with yourself and give yourself a shot to kind of catch up and figure out what you don't know.
Yeah,
and you're going to make mistakes. And that happens forever, the end. I mean, I'm still ask my daughters. They'll let you know I make many mistakes.
We all make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. Mistakes are usually not fatal. It's sort of how you respond to the mistake. Says a lot about your character.
Exactly. So in closing, I want to know, what advice would you give yourself, knowing what you know now? What advice would you give your younger self?
I used to say, because this is a question, I mean, we've both been asked this question. I used to say that I used to think the answer was, don't worry so much. And then I realized, this is connected to what you were just talking about, that what I would really say to myself is, don't worry about whether or not you belong there. You belong. You belong wherever you are. You don't need permission. Just because you're not the very best at something doesn't mean you don't belong. It's your opportunity to learn. And I think we're all so, I mean, I in my 20s, 30s, 40s, and certainly part of my 50s, I was waiting for people to sort of, to validate me in ways I just don't even care about anymore. So,
and the truth is, looking for external validation, you got to look in here. You got to just know, because guess what? If you're doing great stuff, there are going to be some people that still won't give you the external validation.
Still won't. And you know what? It's about them. One of the things
Always.
I say this to myself all the time. It's not about me. Most of the time when people are misbehaving, it's about them. It's not about you. If you can keep that in mind, you won't be knocked over every time someone looks at you the wrong way.
We've all had those nights where something has happened and you toss and you turn and you worry and you wring your hands and you're freaking out because, oh my gosh, what are they going to think? What have they thought? I just did this or I didn't do this. And my dad always helped bring me back to earth and would say, sis, I hate to tell you this, they're not thinking about you.
Yeah. Well, your dad's a honest man.
They're thinking about themselves. And I am here to tell you, so many years later, decades later, it's absolutely true. So cut yourself a little.
Yeah. And you know what? You're not the only thing other people are thinking about. So yeah, that's also a relief.
Yeah. Thank you so much for everything. And everyone, thanks for listening in.
Thanks for listening. May this episode inspire you to move forward. Be sure to go to iTunes, Spotify, katebyrne.co, that's KATEBYRNE.co, or wherever you listen to your podcasts, and listen to even more episodes. Here's to strong women. May we know them, may we be them, may we raise them. And be sure to meet them on the next Women Advancing. Ta till next time.